Hello, welcome to my library, inside the hidden chamber at the wedding of Katherine and Dominic. A lot of people say they want a fairy tale wedding, but I know a lot of real fairy tales, and I'm here to tell you why that's a terrible idea. I don't have a lot of time, because the hidden chamber doesn't have its own air supply, so let's get started. First, there's the story of the princess and the figs. Okay, so once upon a time, there was this king, and he loved figs. And he said, anyone who brings me some figs can be the next king and have my daughter's hand in marriage. So this farmer said to his son, you better get over there with these figs before he changes his mind. So the boy set off for the palace, and along the way he befriended a fish, some ants, and death and the devil. So the boy goes to the king and says, here are your figs. The king says, great, here's my daughter. By the way, she doesn't think you're worthy, so you're going to have to pass 3 tests. So the boy said, oh, okay. And the princess says, here's the first test. And then she takes a ring off of her finger and tosses it into the ocean. And then she says, get it back. That's the first test. But then the boy's friend, the fish, shows up and gives him the ring. And then the princess says, okay, test number 2. You are going to have to clean up all this grain. And she has her guards dump grain all over the palace steps. But then the ants show up and they pick up all the grain. And the princess didn't really have a third test ready, so she says, well, now you've got to get me the most beautiful flower in heaven. And the boy is immediately transported to heaven by Death, and Death says, here is a flower from heaven. And then the boy shows the flower to the princess, but the princess says, well, there's actually a bonus round, and you're gonna have to get me the tallest flames from hell. But then the boy is immediately transported to hell by the devil, and he says, hey devil, I can give you this flower if you can bring the princess your tallest flames. And the devil says, deal. And he grows to the size of a building, goes up to the castle and says, hey, you better marry this guy or I'm gonna burn this whole place down. And then he waves his flames around and scares everybody. And then the princess finally says, ugh, all right, I'll marry this guy. The end. Our next story is 3 Nights in the Enchanted Castle. There was this charcoal burner who had 3 sons. And one night, the youngest son was watching the kiln and fell asleep. And when he woke up, the kiln had burned down. The charcoal burner was now penniless and told his sons that they would have to go out into the world and seek their fortunes. The oldest son got some gold, the middle son got a ham, and the youngest son, Hans, got nothing. But then his mom gave him a loaf of bread and some pennies. The 3 brothers set out and went their separate ways. Along the road, Hans saw a dwarf who was begging. He gave the dwarf his only pennies, and in return, the dwarf gave him a magic key. When Hans looked up, he was standing in front of a magnificent castle. He used the key to get in and found an enchanted woman inside. She said, hey, this castle's been enchanted, but if you can sleep here for 3 nights, you'll break the enchantment and the castle will be yours. You have to stay through the whole night no matter what happens, but don't worry, you won't get hurt. Sort of. Hans decided to go with it. As soon as he got into bed, a bunch of horrible ghosts appeared. They stretched Hans out on a rack, then they chopped him into pieces with scimitars. But when morning came, Hans woke up back in the same bed without a scratch. The next night, more ghosts came and threw Hans onto a bed of spikes. Then they folded the bed in half so that all the spikes ran through Hans from each side. But again, in the morning, everything was fine. On the final night, 12 guys with clubs showed up, and they wailed on Hans through the entire night. In the morning, they vanished with a crack of thunder, and the enchanted woman became a princess. The princess said, good job. The castle is yours, and now we'll get married and you'll sleep here every night. And she married him on the spot. The end. Tonight's final tale is In the Mouth of the Merman. So there was this village near a lake, and all the girls in the village would swim in the lake, and they became very beautiful. Girls from other villages would come swim in the lake to try to become beautiful too, but it didn't work, and a lot of them drowned. So, girls stopped coming for beauty treatments, but suitors from all over came to the village to find brides, and all the girls in the village got married on one day. The next morning, there was a huge uproar. Grooms were running from their houses, some were dragging their brides through the streets, and a judge came in to examine the brides. The judge found that the brides all had fish scales, and ordered that they be burned at the stake at once. Just as everyone had lit the fires, a giant merman's head rose out of the lake, and spewed a stream of water from his mouth that doused the flames. The girls walked across the stream like a bridge and gathered inside the merman's jaws. The merman sank back below the water, and now nobody swims in that lake anymore. The end. Now I think we've learned a lot about what fairy tale weddings are like. And all of us can agree that we want Katherine and Dominic to have the happiest, most joyful wedding possible, because they're two of the most important people in the world to us. So please join me in wishing for Katherine and Dominic to not have a fairy tale wedding. The end.